The last stop, Hollow's End. The platform was deserted, save for the low hum of flickering streetlights and the rustle of wind through broken glass. As the clock struck midnight, I hesitated at the edge of the station, staring down the dimly lit tracks that vanished into the endless dark. This was the last train out, and I needed to be on it. My mistakes haunted me, too many to count. I didn't know where I was headed, but anywhere was better than staying behind, drowning in guilt. The train screeched into view, its long shadow stretching across the platform like a black serpent. I stepped inside, the doors hissing shut behind me, trapping me in the cold, stale air of the carriage. There were only a handful of passengers. The flickering overhead lights cast sharp shadows on their faces, making them look haggard, distant. A businessman in a crumpled suit sat rigid, staring blankly ahead. Across from him, an elderly woman muttered to herself, her eyes darting around the car like she was searching for something or someone long lost. A young couple sat toward the back, whispering in hushed tones, but their smiles seemed strained, brittle. And in the farthest corner sat a man with no luggage, his clothes torn and his face smeared with dirt. He didn't look up. I found a seat by the window, clutching my bag close to my chest. The city lights blurred as we pulled away, swallowed by the creeping fog. I glanced around, wondering if I should feel comfort in the presence of others, but their expressions were hollow, vacant. No one spoke. Moments later, the conductor appeared. A tall, lanky figure with a wide-brimmed hat and a crooked grin. His eyes gleamed in the dim light as he handed me a ticket. My fingers trembled as I took it. I turned it over. Hollow's End. I had never heard of it, but something about the name sent a chill crawling up my spine. As the train barreled into the night, the world outside the window began to change. The familiar urban sprawl of the city melted into an endless expanse of nothing. No trees, no lights. Just a vast swirling fog that pressed against the glass like a living thing. Time seemed to lose meaning as the train sped forward, the rhythmic clanking of the tracks blending into an ominous hum that gnawed at my nerves. Suddenly, a shriek tore through the car. I whipped around, heart racing, to see the businessman clutching his chest, gasping for air. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide with terror. I didn't mean to, he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know she would. I didn't mean for her to die. His words hung in the air, thick with dread. The elderly woman muttered louder now, her eyes wild. They know, oh yes, they know. You can't hide from them. And then, just like that, the businessman vanished. His seat was empty, his briefcase toppled over, papers strewn across the floor. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. How was that possible? Whispers filled the car, soft at first but growing louder, accusing, mocking. It's your fault, they hissed. You did this. I stood, stumbling toward the door, but when I pulled at the handle, it wouldn't budge. I pounded on it, panic rising in my chest. Let me off, I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the suffocating silence. A hand touched my shoulder, and I spun around to see the elderly woman staring up at me, her eyes glassy with fear. There's no getting off, she whispered, not until the end. I backed away, the whispers growing louder. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the cacophony of voices swirling around me. The train lurched, and the world outside the window twisted, contorting into grotesque shapes, blackened figures writhing in the mist, their faces distorted in agony. I turned back to the passengers, but more seats were empty now. The young couple was gone. The drifter in the corner had vanished too, his seat now cold and abandoned. The elderly woman was the last. She was shaking, her hands clutching at the worn fabric of her dress. They'll come for you too, she said, her voice trembling. You can't run from what you've done. My mind raced. I hadn't killed anyone, had I? But the guilt, the secrets I had buried, they gnawed at me. I had ruined lives, betrayed people who trusted me. Every decision I had made, every selfish choice seemed to echo in the whispers around me. The train's speed increased, the walls of the car rattling violently as the fog outside pressed in, thick and suffocating. I ran to the conductor, who stood near the front, his unsettling grin still plastered on his face. Stop the train, I demanded, grabbing his arm. His smile widened, a grotesque twist of his lips. "There's only one way to stop it," he said, his voice smooth, calm, "but it requires a sacrifice." I froze. "What do you mean?" The conductor leaned in, his cold breath brushing against my ear. "One soul for another. It's the only way the train will stop. The only way you survive." My heart pounded in my chest. I looked back at the elderly woman who was still shaking, her frail body trembling in her seat. She was the only one left. I knew what he wanted me to do. "Just one push," the conductor whispered, "or you'll ride this train forever." I backed away, my mind racing. Could I really do it? Could I condemn someone else to save myself? The whispers grew louder, screaming now, urging me to make a choice. My chest tightened, sweat dripping down my brow. I stumbled toward the old woman, my hands shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a strange, resigned understanding. "I won't blame you," she whispered. I stood there, frozen, torn between the horror of what I was about to do and the terror of what awaited me if I didn't. The train hurtled faster, the fog closing in. And then, with a trembling hand, I pushed. The train screeched to a halt. Silence. I was alone. But as I looked out the window, a new horror awaited me. Hollow's End wasn't a town. It was the end of everything, and the train had brought me home.